With thanks to my Patreons Ellie Nicole, Karol Smaczynski, Skylar Krishnik, and Uncle Chop Chop. Thank you for supporting the channel. Welcome to part 1.5 of the Ryan Martinie bass rig. Why 1.5? Well, this episode is kind of a postscript, and it's a little bit of an extra to part 1. I mentioned in part 1 there was a hole in my research of a missing bass player magazine article, and thankfully, a very kind viewer, his name is Paolo, he has sent me the missing bass player magazine article. This episode could not have been possible without Paolo sending in the article. So thank you, Paolo. Thank you so much. You have no idea how grateful I am. And you guys watching at home, please give your thanks to Paolo. This episode could not have happened without him. And here we have the Bass Player magazine featuring Ryan Martinie in January 2003. Why is this important? As far as magazine articles go, this has all of the answers. I missed out in part 1. So when I say I have all the answers, I have all the answers. And we're going to talk about that. Let's take a look at what we have. We have a feature picture of Ryan Martinie with his 5-string Babinga thumb NT. Some people have said the pronunciation should be Bubinga, not Babinga. Listen, I've hung around American musicians. They all said it was Babinga. I'm going to call it Babinga. They're Americans. I'm just going to go with the American pronunciation. That's that. Carrying on. As far as articles go, this one is not groundbreaking, so I won't be reading it out word for word. That'd be far too boring. What I do want to draw attention to is the highlighted parts, and this harbours all of the information we were missing from part 1. Let me share some of the behind the scenes of how I make my videos. When I start my research, I always look at their biography. Where were they born and when? How was their upbringing? And then what was their first bass? And so on. In this case, I have that right here. Born in 1975, Springfield, Illinois. This is important because if you Google Ryan Martinie, anywhere you look, let's take a look at his Wikipedia page. His Wikipedia page says, Ryan Martinie was born August 6, 1975 in Peoria, Illinois. Even Federa, the company that are making his basses, say the same thing. Born in Peoria, Illinois in 1975. It's not a big deal, but if we're going for accuracy to tell the right story for Ryan, we need to include his rightful birthplace. And I want to take the author of this article at face value, Chris Gissy, sitting in front of Ryan. Ryan, when were you born? Where were you born? And he tells him, Springfield, Illinois. Perfect. We set the record straight. Love it. Next up, I want to know what the first bass the player used was. And here we have it. Next section. Ryan got a Fender Squier P bass for his 12th birthday. Perfect. So now we know his first bass. It's not the end of the world if we don't figure that out, but it's nice to know what the first bass was. It's kind of an important question. Where did you start learning to play bass? What was it like? There's going to be a huge difference between someone using a Spectre as their first bass and a Fender Squier. So very interesting to see. In this third comment, I started listening to angry rock and heavy metal. I thought this was interesting because if you were to listen to any Ryan Martinie interview or read anything he's written, he's very loose in the way he answers things. He doesn't give you an exact answer. So, oh, I listen to everything. I listen to rock and pop and funk and fusion, and doesn't give you a direct answer. So I thought it was very interesting to hear him accurately address this and say, yes, I listen to angry rock and heavy metal. So that's just why that's there. Carrying on. We're doing a lot of flip-flopping now. I mentioned in part 1 that Ryan played with Broken Altar, but if you were to Google Broken Altar, not very much will come up, and definitely not any photos or videos of Ryan. So these two passages within this article completely give you new light to his role in that band. Ryan played in various local bands with mostly older musicians, which accelerated his skills. Eventually he landed in Broken Altar, a 3-piece instrumental band. Brilliant. And then later on, with his Ibanez sound gear and Dean 5-strings, Broken Altar opened for a show for Mudvayne in 1995. And Ryan's stage grooves and moves left an impression. 2 years later, while working as a cook, Martinie got a call to audition for Mudvayne. For me, this adds another layer of history onto Ryan's biography. We know his first bass was a Squier Precision. Perfect. He did join a band called Broken Altar around the mid-1990s. He used an Ibanez sound gear and Dean 5-string bass. That is groundbreaking, and we finally brought it to light what he used in Broken Altar. Moving on to the next section, we get the origin of Mudvayne's tunings. What was the origin of the unusual tuning? That's all Mudvayne. When I joined the band, I tuned my 5-string F sharp, B, F sharp, B, E. We used that tuning on LD50 and we had intonation problems. I've heard this elsewhere, so it's good to find it confirmed in the article and said by Ryan. For this album, The End of Things to Come in 2002, we come up with a half step. I used mainly my Warwick 4-string tuned CGCF. The move up was mainly because Chad Gray felt more comfortable singing there, but it also helped with the intonation. This passage is really interesting. He mentions my Warwick 4-string. We know he has two, so it's possible at this time, in January 2003, he only had his black Warwick 4-string, and the Babinga soon followed. Very cool. Moving on, I tagged this for the die-hard Ryan Martinie fans. World So Cold is his favourite song on The End of Things to Come, and then Severed was his favourite on LD50. Just a tidbit there, if you didn't know, now you know. And we continue. Some more pictures and technique of Ryan playing. Nothing in particular we didn't know already. We carry on. On the penultimate page, we get one of the biggest answers I have been looking for. I mentioned during LD50 there was some rumblings or mentionings of Ryan using a fretless bass. Here we have it confirmed during the recording of The End of Things to Come on the song A Key to Nothing. I used my fretless Padula Buzz 4-string. Perfect. We now have confirmation from Ryan himself. He used a fretless bass, probably on LD50, definitely on the second album, The End of Things to Come. This is huge. There is no other confirmation of him using it apart from this article. So glad to have that out there, and finally a confirmation from Ryan himself. Very happy with that. Just to give you some perspective for this final page, Mudvayne's album The End of Things to Come was released November 2002. This article came out 2 months later in January 2003. So some of the stuff was used to record, and some of the stuff you'll see during his live performances. I'll just read out what it says, and then I'll go through some points that have caught my attention. Ryan Martinie's main bass is his black Warwick Thumb 4-string, with an ebony fingerboard, chrome hardware, and nickel frets. For some reason, people love to bring up the nickel frets thing, so I'm going to do so too, nickel frets. His backup Thumb 4 boasts a rosewood board and gold hardware. Also on tour are two Warwick Thumb 5s with ebony and rosewood necks and Babinga bodies, and a fretless Padula Buzz 4. All get DR high beams, strung 45 to 105 or 135 on the 5th string. They're tuned GCGCF and CGCF. Now, I have a few things to say about this, and I'm not saying the writer of the article is incorrect. What I am saying is sometimes if you're not familiar with an artist, you might get the wrong end of the stick, and I think that's happened here. Let me explain. Ryan's main bass at this time was the Warwick 4-string in black with ebony fingerboard and chrome hardware and nickel frets. Yes. His backup Thumb 4 boasts a rosewood board and gold hardware. Yes. This is referring to the Babinga 4-string. Correct. It then says there are two Warwick Thumb 5-strings, both with ebony and rosewood necks and Babinga bodies. Incorrect. Unless this is an oversight, this insinuates that he has two 5-strings both made of Babinga. Not true. He has the 4-string black, the 5-string black, the 4-string Babinga, the 5-string Babinga. That's what he used on his tour. There was no difference to that. The article also mentions the fretless Padula Buzz 4. It might have been on tour. I haven't seen it. I haven't heard about it. I haven't seen any pictures. Maybe. Probably not. DR high beams 45 to 105. Pretty much. But I'm still insistent he used DR Black Beauties. There are videos of him using black strings, and even when you look at the reverb video of him selling his 4-string, that's going to come up in part 2, the bass still has Black Beauties on them. He was using Black Beauties at some point during Mudvayne. So yes, perhaps he used high beams earlier, but during this tour, specifically 2003, he gets the Black Beauties. He changes his strings daily. His action is high for live playing and lower for recording. So there you go if you want to recreate that yourself. He runs both pickups on full and turns his bass active controls all the way up. Interesting. And then finally, in regards to his rack equipment, we have the Shure wireless receiver, a Whirlwind multi-selector, that's to switch between basses and the wireless packs. And then we're moving on to the DBX 160 compressor. I make a big deal out of this in my first part. Ryan uses a 160A compressor. I have this evidence in a few different pieces. He uses a 160A. There seems to be some information lost in translation here, as it says here, according to bass tech Tim Matifs. So it's not Ryan telling the writer of the article. This could just be a mistake, just something very easy to omit. It's a 160A or 160, it's just one of those things. No big deal. For his amplifiers, we now have confirmation that in 2003 he was running an SVT 4 Pro. I didn't know that. Very good to know. So we now have this in the timeline. 2003 SBT4 Pro. That's sat on top of the SBT PR 8x10s, which we do know about, and his usual SBT2 Pro heads were backups. There we go. Pretty cool. The sound is run to front of house using an AR133 direct box, using the SBT4 Pro's FX loop. And then we just get a last bit of information here. And then in this final passage, we have, on the end of all things to come, he plucked his black Warwick 4-string, the fretless Padula on a key to nothing, and the Warwick 5-string on Mercy Severity. Verse sections. All were recorded both direct and through mic'd amps. His full Ampeg rig, plus an SWR Working Man 10's head, driving Greg Trebet's Mazer Boogie 4x12 guitar cabinet for added mid-range and top end. I'm not quite sure how that works, but it's there again in confirmation. And there we have it, the Bass Player magazine article for January 2003 featuring Ryan Martinie. I mentioned at the beginning, this has got to be one of the best bass player articles I've ever read. It has all of the information I was missing from part 1 answered by Ryan directly and his bass tech. It doesn't get any clearer than that. Thank you again to Paolo for sending me the article. I've had a lot of fun reading this, and it's just great to know the answers to these questions. I can sleep in peace now. Coming up very soon, we conclude the Ryan Martinie bass rig. We take a look at Korn, Karai, Bassist Alliance, Soften the Glare, a bit more Mudvayne, and there's new news from Fodera Basses. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.